So what do you make of the president's decision praising the Supreme Court decision to expand his powers to fire officials within the executive branch of the government, calling it a big win?
Well, it's one of the few pieces of good news for him, frankly, out of what we've seen in the rulings so far from this Supreme Court day. This has been a case that has been long in the making by a number of the president's top advisors, a small group of advisors who were preparing for a second Trump term. We write about this actually extensively in the book, how they had looked at, and Jonathan did extensive reporting on this at Axios, even before he was at the Times, how they had looked at pockets of independence inside the executive branch, how they believe there is no such thing under the unitary executive theory, that the president controls these so-called independent agencies and has the power to make changes there. So this was an expected ruling, but it is an affirmation of how Trump has governed and sought to expand executive power.
You know, it's interesting because the Supreme Court also said this morning that it wouldn't hear President Trump's challenge of that $5 million jury award to E. Jean Carroll for sexual abuse and defamation. Are we likely to hear the last of this case from the president? What do you think?
I'm reluctant to speculate, but based on our reporting, I think it's unlikely that you've heard the last about it. There are a few things that he was more enraged about than the E. Jean Carroll case. So I don't think you've heard the last of that at all.
What do you think?
No, I mean, based on our reporting, and we write extensively in the book about all of these court cases during the campaign, he was extremely unhappy about the E. Jean Carroll decision and being there for the second trial during the primaries. I assume he will say something at some point. But
and Maggie, you know Trump, you've covered him and you understand. You think he's actually going to write out a check for $5 million to E. Jean Carroll?
I'm reluctant to speculate as to whether he will actually do it, but I think that if he does it, it will be under extreme protest.
Yeah,
he may not have a
choice.
Right. I want to dig a little bit.
If he doesn't want to break the law.
Right, if he doesn't want to break the law. And your book is named Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. I emphasize the title because I think it really encapsulates this interaction you had with President Trump, where you go, you meet with him, and he pulls out this document that he says was written by a historian. You later find out it's written by a golf caddy, where it lists names of historic dictators, in some cases very brutal dictators, and makes an argument that Trump is more powerful. And so I'm wondering, what is your understanding of how Trump views his power and his level of satisfaction or lack thereof with the power he currently has?
It was a remarkable moment sitting in the Oval Office, having him have an aide hand us this document that you were describing. And he did it because we had asked about how he views his power and how he views his power in the context of past American presidents. It's something he had been talking about privately. We wanted to see if he would talk about it with us. And he was not making a moral judgment about these people who he was listing off. And he referred to them as the top 10. And it was Stalin, Mao, the Caesars, Attila the Hun, Alexander the Great, Hitler, Napoleon. I mean, I'm missing a few, I think. But he was not in any way reflecting on what they had done to bring them to power and what they had done as leaders. It was the notion that they were memorable, they had power, but that he had more. And what he wanted us to understand was that he is willing to use his power.
The whole point of the title of this book, Regime Change, people, when they think of regime change, they think of foreign regime. We're always used to talking about regime change in Iraq, regime change in Iran. We came up with this title long before Trump went into Caracas and snatched Maduro out of his bedroom or started a war in Iran. It occurred to us pretty early last year that we were covering a form of regime change in America, that Trump was using presidential power like no president in our lifetimes, and in some respects like no president ever, in some of the respects that we cover in the book.
Do you think he sees any ceiling on his power, or is it just an insatiable appetite?
He has said publicly that he sees, at least so far, no limits. Now, it's been in specific context.
The Iran War,
in the context
for example,
of the Iran War.
Yeah.
What he said to our colleagues earlier this year was about the limits of his own power internationally. I think this is what he was saying. I'm paraphrasing, but it was that, his own morality, his own sense of what's acceptable and not. What our reporting shows in the book, and I think you are seeing this again with some of these rulings today, he is going to test the limits of his power in many different ways. And the court system in the U.S. really was not built for someone like Donald Trump. It's not equipped to keep up with him. And what we have seen is the only authority that this administration really acknowledges is the Supreme Court, because they will take various cases through lower court challenges and then see whether they can expand power for good at the Supreme Court.
Your new book, Jonathan, includes really amazing insight into President Trump's decision to launch these strikes on Iran alongside Israel. You also note the confusion and even the pushback among some of his key cabinet members. In public, they all seem to show unfailing loyalty and support. But tell us more about what actually was going on behind the scenes.
It was a pretty astonishing sequence of events, starting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, coming down to the White House Situation Room, pitching Trump on this war, showing a video montage of possible new leaders to take over Iran. Overnight, the CIA did an analysis of that presentation, and they concluded that the regime change scenarios from Netanyahu were divorced from reality. So Trump meets in the Situation Room with his team. John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, tells him it's farcical. Rubio uses coarser language. Trump goes ahead with it anyway from his gut instincts. What I think people don't realize about this war is there's basically no one on Trump's senior team who thought it was
The vice president was very tough too on it.
Well, he was the only one who really vocalized it. Basically, no one on Trump's team thought it was a good idea. The closest to think it was a good idea was Hegseth. There was various levels of skepticism from almost everyone, but unlike the first term, they didn't really express it to Trump. There weren't these big heated
J.D.
arguments.
Vance did.
He was the exception, and it actually cost him. It irritated Trump. You did have people lay out risks. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs absolutely did, but there wasn't the sort of direct, you shouldn't do this arguments.
I wanted to ask about Epstein, but just to follow up with you, do you see any correlation with the fact that it irritated Trump that J.D. Vance was pushing back, and now Trump has sort of made him the face in many ways of the negotiation?
I don't see that really. I think J.D. Vance, from our reporting, seems by all accounts to be quite happy to be the one to try to steer this toward a peace deal and to be associated with the peace of this. I mean, you barely heard from him during the war itself, and he's everywhere now. I think he's quite comfortable talking about the peace deal element of this.
Yeah.
Because he thinks that could help him potentially if he decides to run for president.
I also think it's what he believes. I mean, really, again, there wasn't really a political advantage to him doing what he did with Trump. He needs Trump support to be the nominee.
We are interviewing Chairman Comer coming up, of course, the head of a House oversight, and I wanted to bring up Epstein. We're going to ask him about Epstein, and you really bring us inside the White House, inside the Situation Room, as White House officials deliberated how to handle Epstein, which is really unusual to be in the Situation Room talking about something like this, right?
Yeah, the White House Situation Room complex, as you know well, is typically used for national security discussions, emergencies, discussing foreign policy. Sometimes natural disasters. This was the first time that we knew of where it had been used for essentially a crisis PR center on how to get out of a clamor within the MAGA base over unreleased files related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And there were a number of meetings in that room. We just focused on a few of them. And there were people in Trump's orbit who were concerned about the victims, but that was not the primary discussion at these meetings. This was about how do you deal with something that the president just wanted to go away. And we report on this in the book. He wanted it to disappear. He was snapping at aides when they would bring up Epstein. So what ended up happening were these series of remarkable meetings with the top levels of this government. The vice president, White House chief of staff, White House counsel, attorney general, deputy attorney general, FBI director, and that's just a partial list, discussing what they saw as their options. And some of these meetings were described to us as surreal, at least in terms of how detailed they got.
And Maggie, before I let you go, very quickly, how do you react when Trump bitterly and awfully, he goes after you in public and social media and elsewhere?
It's not the first time he's attacked me. We've both been through it. It doesn't impact how we report, and we're in pretty good company at this point in terms of him attacking people.